Good afternoon, and here is good evening. Thank you for inviting me and having the opportunity to talk about this piece, my approach to the Chinese culture, which is a little bit extraordinary. The story is that I was invited as a guest professor in Shanghai 5 years ago in the summer term, and I was there weekly, 1 week per month, and around 4 or 5 times. And in the first week, there was a concert with the students' composition, so 4 hours with 17 compositions, and all the instrumentation were a combination of typical 19th century romantic European instruments as piano and violoncello on the one side, and on the other side, traditional Chinese instruments like pipa or the flutes. And I have to admit that I wasn't satisfied. The point is that these two types of instruments does not fit together, because the European ones are perfectionized in the 19th century in timbre, in register, and in particular in pitch, so that they are able to play the well-tempered, rationalized interval systems we have here in the Western world. On the other side, you have these more archaic and rough and not so perfectionized instrument by the Chinese culture, which on the other side is sonically more narrow to the contemporary music and the so-called new music or avant-garde or experimental music in the Western world, because there, as in particular in the last, let's say, 5 decades, we were searching for alternative for this perfectionized 19th century sound in terms of special techniques, playing techniques, noise, sound combinations, and microtonality, and so on. So I was very struck by the Chinese instruments because of their similarity or familiarity to what I'm seeking also as a contemporary avant-garde composer. So, and then my ambition was stimulated, and I asked myself, can I, as a typical Western, not orthodox, but modern composer, I am able to write a piece only with or for Chinese traditional instruments. I'm not a crossover composer combining everything with everything. So I'm a very European or Western composer, and using only my or our instruments. But then I said, well, I want to make the proof. I want to test myself whether I will be able to do that. But I was totally ignorant at that time. And I asked my colleagues in Shanghai at the conservatory, is there anyone in China able to help me, or an ensemble willing to demonstrate me the instruments, to coach me, and even that I will compose that piece for them. And after a while, the Beijing Forbidden City Orchestra, which is an ensemble of traditional instruments in the China Conservatory in Beijing, was willing to invite me. This is not the main conservatory, but it is more or less for the popular and the indigenous music in China. So, and the next year, in May 19, I traveled to Beijing for a couple of days and had lessons by 7 instruments. I was a 7 instrumentalists with their 7 instruments, and I was prepared by what I found in books or even in the internet or even by a student of mine who was at the same time a doctoral student in Hong Kong. So, and he gave me the informations. And then they showed me everything and answered my questions. I made recordings and even pictures and even videos. And with these impressions, I went back to Germany. So the point is, my experience was that somebody was more open-minded and another one was a little bit more conservative. And so the rule is the younger, the more open-minded, and the female are more open-minded than the men. In particular, the Ruan player wanted to have beautiful melodies, and I can't write beautiful melodies. And I think that he expected something in pentatonic system. So, and then I came back and tried to start. And that specific moment, I was very, how to say, very alone, because I had only these short recordings and videos and no informations. But then, fortunately, this book, the Tang Guide of the Chinese. Do you see my screen? Okay, so the Chinese Tang Guide of the Chinese Orchestra was recently published in Singapore. And that's perfect because everything is explained, and all the fingerings and all the alternative fingerings, for example, for the flutes, are explained, and that is important, all this kind of specific notation. So then I had an overview about the techniques and the notation of the techniques, which is different from the German or for the European ones. And I wanted to write for them, also for this ensemble, as close as I can. And so that's the reason why I had such a catalog of all these playing techniques with the signs, which are more or less either for me or for the Western tradition, like Hauptstimme here as a principal voice, or the stamping or lasciare vibrare, but also this kind, which is actually something which is used by the Chinese traditional notation and even used in that book. And then I had to learn everything and to make a translation from the English into German, and then at the end into Chinese. So that was, and then I composed the piece. So excuse me, that is nonsense. And oh my God, that's so. And okay, so do you have any questions until now? Is there anyone? Hello, do you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. I don't think there's any question from the chat.
Very clear so far.
Okay, good. Thank you. So okay, so the next step was knowing that these are not familiar with my rhythms. So as you can see, it is written in space notation, totally in space notation. Because I thought that otherwise they will reject. Okay, they rejected the piece, but that's another story. Only at the end, at the very end, in the appendix, I will explain the form. In the appendix here, I'm using meter and rhythms. but it is not so complicated. In particular, the piece is not polyphonic. So the next idea was to have a like an improvisation session. All the time, one of these instruments as a main principal solo, accompanied by a harmonic field. So, and this is the form. So I decided to have 15 minutes. At 30.5 is the piece, and then you have this appendix. And as you can see here, you have a percussion talia 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, becoming shorter and then a very long one. And I will talk about the proportion later. And this is independent from the ensemble. It's like a background activity. And here you can see the solos as a pipa, guzheng, ruan, ahu, and yang jin. I have to admit that last year I purchased the guzheng, but maybe too late. Yeah. Then I discovered that all these instruments are so cheap here in Europe, coming from China directly through the Suez Channel. But only the Yanqing is not available with the pedal. So you have these kind of solos. And these of gaps, also breaks with a percussion event, mostly with a tam-tam. And here you have another system, another timing schedule with infaded and outfaded harmonic fields. So that is the idea, and very often I compose that at the first. That's the first initial sketch. So I'm starting with an entire form like an architecture. And the proportion, as you can see, is here. So the first is 1, and then 0.9, 0.85, 8, 7, 6, becoming shorter, and then 1.3 is longer. And and this is the coda or the appendix. And then, or even here, golden section proportion. And then I can calculate everything in time, in seconds, as it is, because it is written without a specific tempo. Okay, so, and then look, for example, to the Ahu solo, which is, here is the Ahu solo. Here starts the Ahu solo. I mean, as maybe you know that I'm a complexist composer, so so that means I'm interested in virtuosity, in expressivity, in polyphony. Normally, I'm composing polyphonically, but here it is not possible because that would produce chaos in the ensemble, and even you need then. Okay, you could do that in space notation, but I decided not to overcharge the people. So one instrument is in the foreground, and the rest are more or less, as you can see, harmonic repetitions and field with specific densities. And here the percussion starts with the same procedure. That means if I go here, well, that is the part for the percussionist. Here are the seconds, the beats. Excuse me. This is the beats. Also we have 8, and here 6, and then 5, etc., etc. And he or she, mostly he, has to play it in different tempi. Also, the talia is in each section the same, but it becoming obviously faster and then slower. And so, and the instrumentation, I forgot it. Yeah, okay. We are talking about turnbus. Okay, it's percussion. You have the tam-tam, timbral blocks, large drum, and suspended cymbal. And you have the flutes, also die, also bang di, da di, bei da di. Dann hu, pipa, hu an, also the guitar. Gucheng is the what's in English? Gucheng. And Yanqing is a dulcimer or cymbalum. And so on the and I thought that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is enough for that time. Percussion is an extra layer all the time, and then it can be conducted, but you could also go played without conducting. And the next demand was that I tried to include every playing techniques for that very idiomatic instrument I know or I knew at that time. So which is here listed in this legend. So, and then, I mean, it was not a compromise, but it was the demand between my musical style and the idiomatic characters of these Chinese instruments. And for including microtonality or quarter tones, they are simply available through scottatura in the pipa and in the in Ruan. And Gucheng is not tuned in quarter tones, but a little bit different. Otherwise, it is too pentatonic. But as you know, you can change the pitch of each string with a left hand. So it's more or less microtonal if we use that here with the left hand by pressing down the string. Yes, so, and yes, you can see that is the introitus. So that means it is the tam-tam. And then you have this kind of an harmonic field. Klaus Huber, so the Swiss composer, called that motus. So that means you have activities in space notation, so you can't count the impulses or the grooving. It's like the moment form called by Stockhausen, and it is more or less static. And then the first soloist or main part starts. And then this idea of the harmonic field is continued by the remaining 5 instruments. So that is more or less and I have to say it was actually a hard job to compose that, because it was totally new for me, and I'm not so sure about. Also my imagination is weak, of course, so. Yeah, unfortunately, I sent this score to them and I didn't get any answer. And then my colleague in Shanghai phoned to them, and then they would say, yes, maybe, perhaps. And then COVID started and China came into a permanent situation of closeness. And so that's the reason why it is not yet performed. And I have to find Chinese ensemble everywhere in the world willing to play it.
Yeah, thank you so much for this introduction. I have to say that because one of my musicology friends first introduced me to the score, and the thing that I've been always really curious about is like how it would sound like in performance. So actually, I hope everything will become like easier to find ensembles to actually play it, because I think it will be a huge difference, or maybe not, to compare to what you write on the score and the sonic results. So on the along with this line, I think I have a question for you, Professor Mahnkopf, is that how do you think that the particularity of the Chinese instruments and this formation, how does it change the way you write or not compared to your other repertoire? Of course, other than the fact that you need to collaborate with the performers to know all the techniques. So I'm wondering, in addition to that, how does, for example, the cultural connotation or anything related to the formation or the instrument, the instruments themselves, how do they factor into your process of composition?
Okay, as I said, I'm a European or Western composer, but partly I'm a German composer, so I'm very influenced by the of chords, of harmonies, and so normally I'm using a specific a family, so the strings, to realize a curtain or even harmonic field or a spectrum, as a very varied spectrum, which is more or less homogeneous. And here I'm using totally different instruments of different families in order to get a similar or similar effect. And I've never done it before. So that is the first thing. The second thing is about the cultural implications. Yeah, that is a good question. That piece is a mixture of obviously Chinese sound. As if you plug Gucheng, you know suddenly, immediately that is Chinese. So it's typical. And we have this sonic connotation in your ear. The point is, does it mean anything or not? I don't believe that in this piece, because it is, as we call it, absolute music, or music without a program, without any semantics, without any text. It's simply music, like a jazz session. And but on the other side, it's a combination of two different words. So maybe the German, the Western form and expressivity, and even the human expressivity. It's not only typically cliche like Gucheng sentiments on the one side, and on the other side it sounds Chinese, and even the way of playing in your ensemble is different. So, and then it would be a nice experiment to speak with the audience when the piece is played here, maybe in the Western world or in Beijing. How the people will, what would they say?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. Any questions for now from people here?
There was a hand by Madame or Mr. Young.
Please speak up, because I didn't see any. And if you have questions, you can just unmute yourself and then ask.
I have a question.
Please go
Hi,
ahead.
Professor Mahnkopf. I was interested in something that you said at the beginning of your talk, where you mentioned that you don't think that European instruments and Chinese instruments can mix together or be played together, and your rationale was because of the equal temperament of the European instruments. But what if your musical language is based primarily on timbre and not on pitch or harmonic construction? Would you still have that same attitude? Because I can imagine that it would be possible to mix the two timbral worlds together, and I'm wondering if you could respond to that.
Okay, that is a good remark. Also, first, I only wanted to say that in this specific concert, in the first week there, I mean, these students used the cello and the piano as a European instrument. So pitches, chords, very conservatively. But you can also use a piano in a more advanced way, playing inside with harmonics, etc., etc. So you know that you can also use cello in a different way, like we are researching here in the Western world. So I think that also our contemporary music can approach these the sound and the timbre qualities of the Chinese instruments. If I was only frustrated by these things and by this discrepancy between what they are doing with the European instruments and their own instruments, and I observed as a teacher there, and even here in Germany, I have a lot of Chinese students, mostly female, and after my professorship, all the women and wanted to come to me. It is it's okay. So the point is that there in Shanghai, we had a huge number of students in composition, mostly female, and they wanted to be modern, and they want to write contemporary music. And contemporary music is something which is Western. It's a Western concept. So then they are imitating the Western concepts, and that means they're imitating the textures by Ligeti. So that is the standard. All people are writing like Ligeti. And I said, no, excuse me, but that is very old-fashioned now. And Ligeti is Ligeti, and you are not Ligeti. Try to find your own way. And so they are actually in the crisis of identity between their way of living and their experiences of music and sound in their lively world on the one hand, and that's the demands of art music and Western music, and even the pop music there is more or less the Western ones, because it's played by keyboards, and keyboards are tuned in a well-tempered system, etc., etc., etc. So, and very often they are coming in the crisis of their musical identity. In particular, to have this is a short anecdote. I have a student here, and after 1 year, she confessed that, Mr. Mahnkopf, I believe that my music is a little bit boring. And I said, yes. Yeah, the point is that you are observing that we had a polyphonic thinking. We have a dialectical thinking. We are thinking in drama, in problems, and then resolving the problems. But you are thinking in a harmony and in equity and homogeneity. And this is not two totally different cultural and aesthetical concepts and way of living. And now you are entering in the Western world. You have to decide either you adopt that or not, or to make a third of the two options. Whereas I would not change my my feelings or my aesthetics beliefs by using these with these option of sounds.
Thank you. May I ask a follow-up question?
Yes.
So I don't know what's happening in Germany, but over here in Victoria, we're starting to question this very notion of what instruments belong in an orchestra, because the orchestra that we have at school is largely based on that 18th century European model, with the four families, and there's some that want to keep it that way, but I think there are some that are imagining that actually you could have Chinese instruments in the orchestra, or you could have electronic instruments or any sort of thing. What is your opinion of that? Do you think the orchestra, as we know it, is a fixed timbral entity, or can it take in some of these instruments from other cultures?
No, obviously we are artists and we have to develop the music for the future, and nothing is fixed for every time. I mean, the point is that the orchestras, and we have in Germany or in the Central Europe, we have hundreds of orchestras that are actually conservative. So you can't find any. You might find Asian instruments, but only with the percussion, but not in the woodwinds or in the brass or even ahu or whatever. And if you want to use that, then these are extra instruments, and you have to pay, or you have to invite the pipa player or what you want. But this is irregular, and so, and most, and if that is allowed or arranged, for example, by a contemporary music festival, then it is labeled Crossing, also West meets East, or East meets West, and then these are more or less but that's a special event. At the end of Lachemann's opera, there is a show. So this is this mouth organ. And so not only he, but there was a show player from Japan, and she was very famous, and and she was a lovely woman, and everybody wanted to compose for her. And then he invited her or included in this opera, and all the time when the opera is played, a show player must be found and integrated as but that is a Fremdkörper, so it's something which is a little bit alien. It fits to what to his avant-garde music language, and it's a reminder for the girl who died before. It sounds very beautiful, as an vox humana coming from the heaven or so, and so that is the idea, but it's an extra thing. So I'm living here in Berlin or in Leipzig. Berlin is more open-minded. It's an international city. Leipzig is extremely 19th century. But for example, the rich countries with culture like Canada or Norwegia, with that flexible cultural mixtures, maybe it's your chance to establish new settings in orchestras or in ensembles. Maybe you have better circumstances for this than we have.
Thank you.
And I have to say that, well, politically, we have that war against Ukraine, and I composed an Ukraine triptych, yeah. And now I wanted to write an Iran triptych, and so that is the point. So Ukraine is more or less Europe, and I'm using European instruments. But for the Iran, I'm using Islamic or even Arabic instruments like the oud, qanun, and percussion instrument from that. That is a new challenge for me. So I have to purchase this instrument because I need to have that here at home and to learn, or to even to yeah, a little bit to learn that, and then to integrate it into this more contemporary music sound, which also includes normal instruments, but also noises. And I know that this is also risk, because it's not my language, and I wanted to be offended as the so-called cultural appropriation. So, but it's actually my comment to this female revolution now going on in Iran. So that means I have a concept, a specific program or concept. It's about these wife, life, and freedom. Also Yin, Yang, Asadi. And for this reason, I need 3 voices, female voices, okay, but these are more voices, but also a kind of a setting of oriental instruments.
If I may ask another question, going back to the piece Zhōng. So I remember you mentioned that for the composition of this piece, you acquired actual instruments as in this ensemble, and also you had this book of the orchestration where you can consult the techniques. So I'm wondering, how does these two sort of aspects of studying the instrument, one from playing with it yourself, sort of treating it as an absolute sound, an instrument that you can play around without, like you already said, that without so much about the cultural connotation of what's previously associated with it, versus the techniques or the knowledge that you had from that book. So I'm wondering, how do you balance those two or not? Do you think it's for people who are composing for instruments who are not familiar, like as a composer who are not familiar with a specific instrument, but with a kind of cultural connotation connected to it? If you have any sort of suggestions to composers working on that, along that line, or what is your take or your personal idea? These two sides, one is from the established knowledge and the other from more abstract, sort of connected to your own aesthetic. Yeah.
Oh, that's difficult. So you are talking about the cultural connotations of sounds, and I'm a little bit independent or ignorant even, because I know very well I believe that I know very well the cultural connotation of the European or even Western, or the American music, of our music, or of my music, because I grew up with that, and I had so many, the entire life, all the discussions, everything. I'm playing the piano and teaching and listening and reading books, etc., etc., etc. So I'm not Chinese, and I simply don't know anything about the effects, the impacts, the connotations, the feelings of traditional music in any culture. It could also be in Africa. I was in Ghana, for example, and they are drumming, or even in Myanmar, where it is more or less South Asia, or wherever. And it would be arrogant if I pretend to know that. So that means I have to approach to this instrument in a very naive, childish, like a virgin. So I'm going there and using this. But look, for example, this vibrato or this pitch bending in the guqing, that's very interesting. So it's very often played by female players, and this is a specific kind of their expressivity. But also I have a specific kind of bending, which can use on the violin, a little bit on the guitar, but it can be, or by the lute, no, by the lutes, yeah, of course, by the strings, because we have the glissandos, we can do that. And so that means that the connotation for me, as I know what this kind of connotation could it be for me, but that could also be different for them. And I simply have no answer for this or no solution. The only thing is that I need friends, so direct. As I must be a member of a community of maybe Chinese original players, but I'm not. I have to admit that I'm not.
Yeah, that's still interesting because it sort of reminds me of how this sounds like a sort of accident between, like you said, your own experience without knowing any of the culture or the connotation behind it. But then somehow there's sort of a contact between certain points, like the vibrato, that sort of established a kind of intangible link, which, yeah, for me, it's because for now, like I don't have the audio, like it's hard for me to imagine what it sounds like. Yeah, but it would be something I'd be really interested to see, like as a Chinese or as people, and as a person who knows, who has this kind of prior experience with the instruments, what are the kind of affects the music will have. You know, so I think, yeah.
I give you an example. You know the overpressure scrunch tone on the strings. You can also do that by the Ahu, and I observed that. I have a video with that, but I didn't use that because that's European, and it's a little bit ridiculous to do the same thing on the Ahu. Whereas in the Ahu you have three different vibrato techniques. Because the Ahu is simply has a different form from the German from the European string instruments. So, and then I said, well, I will use these three different vibrators because that is idiomatic. So I'm talking about idiomatic sound quality. So if I write a piece for guitar, I wanted to write a piece for guitar and not in an alienation that it sounds like anything else. Well, sometimes I grew up in the 80s and when I started, and in that time people thought, no, I don't want to use a guitar as a guitar. I want that the guitar is sounding like a flute. I said, oh God, if you want, I don't. I want to actually write idiomatic pieces. So, and even here, to understand what is a pipa, and it should actually written and even with the hand and the fingerings and with the movements, it's very typical, but it should be my music. So that was my ambition.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions from people here?
Yes, I was wondering if you have already strategies to communicate your ideas with the musicians you expected to. I mean, if tomorrow you find an ensemble to play the piece with the notation, and how do you have some strategy to communicate the score, to send the score, and maybe some techniques that are not used to do with them?
Okay, also my ethics as a composer is to write a score which is totally understandable and comprehensible after my death. So it should be clear without any of my explanations. So that means in the rehearsals, also in particular for premieres, the first contact, okay, I'm responsible for my mistakes or for misunderstandings, or even or not, or the explanation are not exact enough, for example. But then I try simply to help them to read score in very details. Look, here is a pause, and look, this isn't a staccato, and here, no, now you have to do this or that. And sometimes they are a little bit overtasked because you have 2 or 3 information at the same time. Also, as I can say, for example, here in the also here, for example, here you have the membrane trill, and here you have different fingerings, and you have flutter tonguing, and here you have mordents with with the same pitch, with different fingering, etc., etc. And so, and very often it is they are playing only one information and missing the second one. So, and then I help them, and even simply psychologically to calm down. Yeah, that it will be fine at the end. So, but I don't explain that in cultural terms or in narratives or in storytelling or even images. So only in technical terms, and maybe also maybe singing and producing the sounds and helping, but it is more technical devices as a conductor does.
So thank you. So if you sing, it means you imagine to talk with them to introduce the piece. It's not the score is by itself enough.
No, I only help. And
Okay.
theoretically, I give you an example. I have composed my Void und Diletto Italiano, which is a sextet for voices. And to write for voices with all the kind of particularities of the voice and the text and the phonetics, etc., 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 it's so difficult to find a very clear notation. And mostly it is not actually possible. So, and I composed that for one of the best ensembles here in Germany, for the Neuen Vokalsolisten in Stuttgart, and then the score was published. And then in New York, Ekmelis wanted to play that. And 3 weeks before the rehearsal, the performance, they sent me a recording. It was perfect. I was totally astonished. How is it possible to sing my piece without me, without any helps? And it is so perfectly. Okay, they are perfectionists, and they are very smart, typical American sportive musicians, willing to do everything at the top. But I was actually astonished about this perfection. And on the other side, okay, my score was obviously more or less clear. And then I traveled to New York, and I had to say only small things. And so that means they did not need me.